Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Supervision Matters podcast with Rita Sever, a leadership coach, HR consultant, and author of Supervision Matters and Leading for Justice. Welcome, everyone. So excited today because we're going to talk about the F word, feedback. That's right, Rita. Are you ready to talk about the F word?
I am.
We're giving feedback today, right? Not receiving
Yeah,
it, but giving it. Oh, that could be hard for some people to give feedback, right?
it's hard for most people to give feedback, I think, not positive feedback. People love to say you're doing a good job, although they often forget to say that. But
mm,
when they have to give somebody serious feedback, it's often challenging.
mm. Yeah, I mean, you sent me an email saying, okay, think about the question about if someone has spinach in their teeth, would you tell
Right,
them?
right.
Yes.
I think that's a fascinating question because it's a very simple kind of feedback that people want to hear. So you're good to go, really. But in this study, they said 69% of people said yes, they'd tell a colleague. So that's still 31% wouldn't tell a colleague. 60% said they would tell someone they supervise, and only 49% would tell someone that they perceived as being higher up the ladder than
Ooh,
them.
excuse me. Wow.
And that's the most, again, putting it not in terms of the spinach question, but in terms of this is the most basic feedback that people want to hear, and we're still hesitant to do it.
Is it hesitancy or is it that a lot of people are not liking their supervisors as
Well,
a
that's
whole?
in
I mean,
there
it could be
too.
that too.
Yep,
As
absolutely. That's part of it.
yeah, I
I
think
think
it's
a
like,
lot of
okay,
it is just feeling like, oh, it's not my place to tell them. Somebody else will tell them. I don't want to upset them, whatever. I don't know, but it's
hmm.
fascinating to me.
Well, feedback is it's I think it's really important
It
personally.
is. It's critical.
Um, as Nancy and I travel the country doing our park tour and documenting parks, we pet sit. And so when we're doing our podcast and everything like with you, we're pet sitting and it's not for money, as many people know, it's through trusted house sitters. And the whole thing is it's a it's all about being very transparent. And
Mhm.
so who we pet sit for, they review us and we review them. And it's about feedback. So whatever feedback we give back is for pet sitters to know that may go sit for somebody and vice versa. And it's like a review. So it's kind of like the Airbnb thing and all of that, or the Yelpers, that gets a little, there's a review, but honestly, I have learned through this for now almost 5 years, have communication and say if something's not right, maybe not do the review and say, can you fix it so that I don't have to do that in the review?
That's great. Yeah. And it falls, we've been talking for several months now, and this goes back to where I started. You want to set people up for success.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't tell them what's not working and what's working, then they're not going to be successful.
So the select for success is one of my favorite things to talk about too, just those words.
Mm.
So in a company situation, feedback, who is doing the feedback? I mean, could it be from colleague to colleague as well, right? Maybe so you may be working on a project with a team member and the other team member is slacking. Do we go
Mhm.
like, hey, is something wrong? What do we do at that kind of scenario?
Yeah, ideally, in an organization, you want everybody to give everybody feedback when they need to. And if that doesn't work, if you do your best to tell your colleague that they're not doing what they need to be doing, then there should be a system where you can talk to their supervisor or somebody else can help you talk to them. But ideally, everyone would feel safe and empowered to talk to each other, as you said, to keep communication open.
Yeah. It's like if you have that open door of communication, it goes before it becomes like a written down in pen thing.
Well, that's a step
Oh,
down the road. We want to have
okay.
the conversations that are collegial and supportive and informative.
Mm,
before we get to the point where somebody has to be written up or it has to be in writing, which sometimes it does, but
mm.
often it doesn't.
So with feedback in the world of HR, are there like, do you wait for the meeting? Like, okay, we're going to always have this meeting on the third Wednesday. Or when you see something, do you nip it in the bud? Where does that balance come in?
Right. It really depends on the situation. There's some feedback that can wait for the regular meeting. And overarching feedback, I think, needs to wait for the meeting. But yeah, if you see somebody doing something in the moment and you can just set them straight, of course, just go ahead and say,
Mm,
hey, I noticed, you set it up this way and it needs to be done this way instead. Or, hey, just want to let you know that the way you talked to that customer it didn't land right.
mm,
And let's make a note to talk about how to do it better when we meet in our regular
mm,
meeting. Um, so you want to give feedback like that privately, of course. Most of the time your feedback's going to be private. The one exception to giving feedback privately is when there is an egregious situation like harassment or
mm.
something like that is happening, where you not only have to address it right then and there, but you have to let other people who happen to be there that you know that you're addressing it. So you don't
Okay.
call a public meeting or anything, but say
Yeah.
you're, in a meeting and somebody says something inappropriate, then you need to say, hey, no, that's not okay.
No.
Let's get back to our topic. And
And
then
feedback is
you
positive
follow.
too, right?
Yeah,
Feedback
yeah,
is positive. You see someone doing
absolutely.
something extraordinary, give
Absolutely.
feedback right away.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
That's so important.
I
Yeah.
think the feedback word, that's why I called it the F word.
Yes, I actually know somebody who got married and they talked about that in their vows. Let's make sure we keep doing the F word together our whole marriage. And they said our favorite F word is feedback.
Okay. I
It
was
was
like,
such a
whoa.
great setup.
I was like, okay, the parents are loving that. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the feedback, yeah. So it's really communication, not necessarily negative, and finding the ground and going. Feedback is like, oh, I like this, but hey, this may be over here. It's about finding a unified connection to do what's right. It's not.
Absolutely. My favorite definition of feedback
Mm,
is pretty simple. Feedback is information about past behavior delivered in the present, which might influence future behavior. And
ooh,
it's so simple, but so hard to do. And two words in particular of that definition I like. The first three, feedback is information. What you just said, that's all it is. It isn't criticism. It isn't, doesn't have to be negative. It isn't putting people down or saying you're terrible. It's information to help people be successful.
mm,
So that's the first part. And the second part I think is important for people to remember is the may, which may influence future behavior. So
ooh,
you can't make somebody do something they don't want to do, but you can tell them what it is, show them how they can do it better, and give them the invitation to be more successful.
mm. What about judgment calls? Because judgment is part of this, right? That's kind of where it can get picky. The judgment part, like you're wrong, I'm right, and maybe the person giving you the feedback may be wrong. That goes to
Yeah.
the may part too.
Right. But I think the barometer for that, as far as I'm concerned, focusing especially on supervision, but anybody in the work,
Yeah, yeah.
is being able to clearly articulate how this impacts the work. So that
Okay.
takes some of the subjectivity out of it. So if I say you're not being polite enough, that's a subjective term. So what do I mean by that? Or my favorite in a bad way is you've just got a bad attitude. What does that mean? That's
Yeah.
going to mean different things to different people. And attitude is part of our mental construct, so we can't really tell what somebody's attitude is. But we can ask ourselves, what do I mean when I say they have a bad attitude? And then I can give them feedback on that. So
Mm,
I'm concerned because I see you roll your eyes when your teammates make a suggestion. I'm concerned because I don't hear you saying please and thank you to your coworkers. And I've heard you interrupt Tom 4 times. Altogether, those make me concerned about how it's going for you working here.
mm. Wow. That's someone that doesn't sound happy.
But they know what they're doing and they can choose to change it or not instead of saying you've got a bad attitude, which is just going to put people's defenses up,
So you
right?
have to be specific.
Exactly. Yeah,
When you do feedback, if you're going to do it, go in specific with the fact, like state the facts.
absolutely. And the same with when you give positive feedback. It's great to say, hey, you did a great job on that presentation in the meeting. Okay, that's nice to hear. But even better if you can say, I watched your presentation and I saw every person in the room was engaged. You spoke clearly. You
Mhm.
offered opportunity for questions, and your PowerPoint looked great. I could tell you worked a lot on it. Good job.
Yeah,
Then
that,
they know that you heard and saw what they
mhm.
did.
Yeah, and yeah, at that point you can just say, I thought all this was great. One thing I would work on for next time, if you haven't thought of it yet, is this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And then it's like, oh, I got something to improve on. So it's not a negative. I mean, that's the thing. Feedback is not a negative. It's something to help you grow, you
Right.
know? And if
Exactly.
you don't
Yeah.
like what you're being told and it doesn't fit well with you, then you have to kind of also figure out what you're going to do with it. And
Right.
that's next month's podcast.
Well, next month is about a formula to help you prepare to give feedback. So
Yeah,
that's
it
what
this
we'll do next.
feedback part is hard. This is a road. This is
Yeah,
like a series on feedback because even getting it, it's like, whoo, because even getting it and receiving it, I love you always send me great bullet points and I always share them in the episode notes and everyone, so check that out. But that's what you talk about, objective, not subjective or judgment. So it's like being informative and being clear, but it's also about not necessarily being emotionally connected. Like if you're friends, if you feel friendly with someone, like if, as a friend outside of work or something, don't bring that in. You have to stick
right,
to the job. Like you've talked about before on the show about like talking to someone where something is going wrong or something in the business and maybe even the management isn't doing as well. Like HR person has to sit there and go, this is for the business. Like
right.
everybody take your emotion stuff and stuff it. Did I say that? I shouldn't.
Not
I
quite,
no,
but
no, that's
somewhat.
not how to say it. But I was just saying because of emotional stuff, that
Right.
stuff. But
But
don't.
I think it's more about don't try not to take things personally and focus on the work. That's why, again, I underline it has to be work related.
Okay. So if someone's rolling their eyes or saying like what I just said, oh, okay, I'm going to take that and stuff it. Now you're going to get taken into the HR room and say, don't use those words, Lisa. But it wouldn't be that. It would be more like, here's what happens with these words, right? That would be a
Exactly.
good,
And
you can use me
let's
as an example. I'm ready. I'm good.
yeah, let's find another way that you can express what you mean without coming across as flippant, which is what people
Yeah.
might hear when you say that.
Yeah, exactly. And flippant is like you're just off the cuff and not prepared, maybe.
Right, right.
Okay. Okay. So let's go through some more of your tips here because this is the general part. Okay. Stick to the work, but then you say normalize feedback. I'm very interested in that because normalizing it is like, okay, this is how we always communicate. So then it becomes
Exactly.
part of the culture, right?
Exactly. This is just part of how we talk to each other. We always want to acknowledge what's working and what's not working.
Yeah.
And I may have said this before that that's my sort of 3 points for the regular one-on-one meetings is what's working and what's not working. And then the third one is what's next? What are we let's agree on what the priorities are between now and when we meet next
Mm,
month.
mm,
But if you can consistently talk about what's working and not working, you're normalizing feedback. And
mm,
it goes both ways. It's not just the supervisor telling the staff member what's working and what's not working. It's discussing it and talking about it. And maybe the staff member has some feedback for the supervisor too. So
mm.
normalizing that it's part of how we talk to each other. As you said, it's part of our culture.
Yeah, and I think because if the employee doesn't have a place to say what's going on, maybe something is suffering in their work due to something happening in the company that you don't know about that's negative.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you
Yeah.
want to keep that, as you said, keep the communication flowing all the time, both ways.
Well, okay. So let's go back to feedback in that, like I said, the F word. Um, Sometimes it's like if something is going wrong and you need to like, hey, I'm going to tell something's going on and this is affecting this production line. For example, I'm trying to get this report out, but someone so is hanging out my office and talking and not leaving me alone to do my work and disturbing my productivity. I'm just making up something. I have no idea what I'm talking about on that, but that's what they're doing. I'm trying to work and this person keeps coming into my office, talking, drinking coffee, and disturbing my work. And you can say to them, hey, I'm really busy. Can we talk at a break time? And
Mhm.
they still keep doing it. At this point, if you go into a supervisor, it may look like ratting out your colleague, right? So I'm kind of feeling like I'm in high school with what I'm talking about. But I
Right.
do believe when we get into adulthood and we're in a work culture, we do kind of have a little bit of high school in us because it's people and humans working
Right.
together. So the feedback time, sometimes in the feedback, you may need to give off some feedback about who you're working with and how it may be affecting you in your production. So that would be feedback for the supervisor or the HR person, right? And it may not be popular.
Well, it's information for them
Mm,
that they need to act on. Or they may, if you came to me, if I was your HR director and you came to me with that feedback, I would first say, well, let's see if there's another way you can say this first, because I don't want to come in and take over unless I need to. I will support you and I will make sure we get there, but let me coach you first to see if there's a more
mhm.
clear way you can say what you've been asking them to do.
Uh-oh.
And again, that's information, that if hopefully that would empower you to
To be
say,
able to say, hey, I mean it.
yeah, help
Yeah.
me. I need it. What I'm doing isn't working. But
Yeah.
then you
See,
could preserve the relationship in a more productive way than if I come in heavy-handed. That's not, it may be necessary eventually, but it's not the first line that I want to take.
okay. So in this part of it all, though, is it good for an employee to come in and at least let you know so it's kind of documented somewhere that there's a situation? Or should you keep doing it on your own and hoping
No,
it works?
no, if you are hitting a place where it's not working, you've tried what you know
Mhm.
how to do and it's not working and your work is being impacted, then absolutely you need
Mm.
to let somebody know what's going on, both to hopefully address their behavior, but also to explain your own productivity.
Yeah, because people can drive people dingbat. Like we could go a little
Absolutely.
sharper than we mean to. We can
Uh,
get a little too soft. We can, so it's
right?
a
It's
balance. But
all
if you're on
complicated.
a deadline and that person is still harassing, all of a sudden they're going to get snapped at, I think. And
Yeah,
then that
yeah,
causes a problem what could
right,
have been solved, you
right,
know. So that's I think this I love what you're talking about so much on these shows because it seems to me that it's all about communication and always saying, this is what we are all here to do for this company. We all have a different role,
right.
but the success of this company or nonprofit organization is what we're here for. And
right.
that is where we stand together, right? That's it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that hopefully we can all keep that in mind when we have human squabbles and preferences and, we get our buttons pushed. We still want to come back to we're all here for the same reason.
I
Let's
hate it when
figure
people
out.
do the button pushing. I don't like the button pushing. Some
No,
people figure
hard.
out how to push your buttons and do it. Even when you know that they're doing that and you react to it, it's so difficult. I'm
Yes,
not good
it
at
is.
that.
Right.
No, no, I don't like it. I don't
No,
like because it drives me nuts that someone would even go to that extreme, right?
yeah, it's very manipulative if somebody's doing that on purpose. I think most of the time people do it inadvertently. They don't know your buttons,
Yeah.
but there are people who do it are thrilled when they figure out your buttons.
And that's how they manipulate their way up in a company. And that's where I feel like this open communication thing can actually help solve that
Right. And
with
that's
the right
definitely a
people.
situation where I would want to report it and have somebody else address it because if the relationship you have with the person is at that level, they're not going to be open to hearing from you. You may,
Oh no, no. You're gonna get trumped on.
yeah. So
And if
then
you're not
you
a
do
person
need to,
you're either gonna go and be like them and see who's and duke it out, or
right,
you're gonna get trumped on. And if you're not that person who can do that, like you
right.
need help.
Yeah. So that's where you need to bring in your supervisor, maybe their supervisor, and maybe even HR.
Well, I saw that in sales when I worked in
Yeah.
sales. Ooh, people would steal customers from each
Oh,
other and it was brutal.
yeah.
And the company culture cheered that on because it's another
Yeah.
sale.
Right.
And that's when I went, I don't belong in that culture because
Right,
I am not like
exactly.
that. I thought I was helping people solve a problem, right?
Right,
That's what I look at sales as. And I went, that's not who I am, and left
right.
over it.
Exactly. Yeah, that
And
makes
I
sense
think
to
that's what,
me.
yeah. And that company is no longer there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so open communication. So feedback, what happens in a company in regards to feedback with the upper management? Do the upper management do feedback with each other too?
They should. It should be, again, part of the culture that feedback can go every which way to peers, up and down, even
Mm,
from, customers. You want feedback
yeah.
from customers. That's what those millions of surveys we get are all about. They've overdone it at this point, I think, but the kernel of the idea of we want to hear what you think is really important. I don't know if in reality the leadership team give feedback to each other, but they should,
Mm,
you
I
know,
think so. Yeah.
yeah. Patrick Lencioni writes wonderful books, and one of his is the um five f- five something of a team, five
Mhm.
fault, five something. And one of them is the inability to have conflict with each other. And that, you need to be able to give each other feedback and you need to say to each other as a team, this isn't working. What we're
Mhm.
doing isn't working.
Mhm.
You need to
Yeah.
know how to talk through hard conversations, dysfunctions. It's the five dysfunctions of a
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well,
by
and
Patrick
that's so
Lencioni.
true. Like, as we do things, like I've looked at things like maybe put out a publication, go, I should have done this. Well, I
Mm,
have next time, so let's do that. And we'll have a
right,
discussion without it being, well, you should have done that.
right, right.
You should have.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't help. Having feedback in terms of a you always comes across like you're shaming
Oh, I
someone.
don't like, don't put your finger in my face like
Yeah,
that.
that's
Rita,
what
you're
the you
sweet. I
feels
don't
like.
like it. Don't
Yeah,
you do that.
yeah,
I'm sitting backwards and
exactly.
you're you're all across the country from me. And I'm like, she's got a finger and it's Rita.
Right.
No, no,
Yeah,
no, no.
that's what
So,
it feels like. So you don't hear
ooh,
anything that comes after the you because you're reacting like that. Like, who are
to
you to
media.
tell me?
Okay, so feedback is like you don't want someone to have like an emotional reaction, like that gut it's like when you're at the doctor and they hit your knee to see if your knee will
Right.
kick back. It will kick back.
Yes,
So
exactly. And
feedback,
that's
that's where
what we're going to talk about next time is how do you prepare it so that the other person will be more likely to hear it. Again, you can't guarantee, but you can
do
do
your
your
best.
best to do your work so they can hear it.
And this is part of normalizing feedback.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's part of a consistency thing. So you talk like a monthly conversation, and that's where the feedback comes in, unless something has to happen immediately.
Yeah, and it depends, on your regular one-on-one meetings. And sometimes
Mm,
with new employees, that's you're probably going to have a once a week one-on-one. But
mm.
with people who are pretty much self-sufficient in their job, once a month usually work.
Now,
And
if you're in a scenario, it might have to be daily. Like, what's going on? How was it out in the field today?
mhm,
And I know you've done a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, and they may be in an actual situation that is life and death,
sure,
doing things. Everybody comes back in. Like, you think about firefighters. Let's do
right,
that. Coming out, going out, they have to come back, and feedback is life and death. That is part of
absolutely,
moving forward and saying what could have been done better, because what happened here? Why did the fire keep going over here? What was that? Was it wind? Should we have done another backfire?
uh-huh, right, absolutely,
So it's kind of like that. All right. And then you talk about in your notes, you say pay attention to self-management. Oh boy.
right.
So in other words, as an employee, don't say stuff it.
Yeah. So you want to just make sure, first of all, that you're prepared.
Mhm.
So it's going to be rare that just see something that is um irritates you that you're gonna and you realize you're irritated and maybe hot about it. You want to pause and not give the feedback in that moment. Maybe come back in 5 minutes and just take a breath so you can think about how you want to say it. And sometimes it's at the other extreme. There are people who are so sensitive that if they have to give hard feedback, they're shaking, their voice is cracking, they may even cry. And that's, they're trying to give feedback to the other person, but then the person has to feel like they have to take care of their supervisor. So that's another way you have to self-manage. And after the feedback, when you're talking, if you feel like you're getting upset, you need to be able to say, I think we need a break. I need a break. Let's take a 10-minute break and then we need to continue this conversation. So
Mm,
that's all part of self-management.
mm. Yeah, and that's hard, especially. And I really want to make a point of this, because if it is not, I think what's so crucial about what you've said through today and before on feedback is the normalizing of it. When it is part of company culture, it becomes a normalcy where it's like, oh, we're having feedback. I can bring this up, and hey, I love this part, or I think this needs to be fixed, right?
Mhm.
If it's not, and sensitivities and emotional, everyone has a different sensitivity level, doesn't make them good or bad. It's just
Right.
how they are as a human.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when it becomes normal, it's not as bad. And when things, and part of that sensitivity thing comes in, I had a meeting once and I was finally the person to tell someone off. I was
Uh-huh.
the only person who stood up, and I turned out I was right. And this person was actually stealing money from a nonprofit. I was the person who said had to go in. And this was, actually part of our company. And it was like a group of people, and this person, anyway, it was bad. And eventually I'm just like, we ain't going to sit back and be quiet
Mhm.
while we know what's going on. And I could hear, I'd prepared it, I did everything I could, but because there was no real communication going on, which is how that person got away with it.
Mm-hmm.
They got away with it because there was no communication, and they cut off communication. So when we have people cutting off communication, it's a sign. And so I was like, well, we're not doing that. And then I went in all nice. And then they tried to be that way again, and I lost it a little bit. I didn't
Mhm.
I didn't yell. but I could hear I could exactly what you said. The heat was, and I was younger, way younger, and the heat was coming up. And I'm like, I'm not letting this get away because this is the one and only time over all these years. And one person did go to jail over this, actually. No, no,
Yeah.
it's a real deal what happened.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. And
this stuff,
recognizing that that was self-management when you realized, okay, I got to pay attention here. I'm
I
feeling,
knew it, but I could still
yeah,
hear my voice, but I'm like, I'm not stopping. If I let go, and
sure,
I was shaking.
right.
And it was visible. Like I had a glass of water and I was shaking, but I was not going to not do it.
Yeah,
But it wouldn't have been, well, number one, it was a crime that was committed. But when it's not normal and something is so bottled up by a number of people in an organization
right.
and there's no communication and the person that you need to talk to about give feedback to is cutting off that communication, and
Mhm.
that can happen in any organization and business, I don't care where.
Yeah,
That's why I think what you're saying is so powerful, because that's where things derail and can go really wrong. I
right.
know mine's a little extreme about what I'm talking about, but I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, on the more, the regular day-to-day work, what often happens is everybody's busy, everybody's got too much to do.
mhm,
So the supervisor doesn't meet regularly with their staff. And then they end up only talking to their staff when there's problems. So the staff don't know they first of all don't know how they're doing because there's no feedback. And that's really disconcerting for people. We don't always like it when we get feedback, but it's even worse when people get no feedback. I've talked to people who said, I had no idea. And they were, ready to leave because it was so uncomfortable. They say, no matter what I do, I don't know if it's right or wrong. I don't know where I stand.
wow,
And so the pattern is often that supervisors are busy, they don't think it's important, so they only talk to people when there's problems. And that is such a disincentive for people. They want to know, like you said, what's working, what the positive and the negative. Tell me
mm,
how I'm doing. And
yeah,
so that's where you have to make it a regular thing.
yeah, and because you can lose an organization overnight, you
Uh,
wonder about businesses that suddenly close. Well, I didn't see it coming because you chose not to.
right, right.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff. Well, next month we're going to be getting into the
Right.
nitty gritty, huh?
Yes, yes. So we'll have to, I'll bring some samples and then together we'll make some samples too.
Oh man, I think this is fantastic. So everyone, again, it's about being clear, right? That's the other thing, clear, specific. Don't you say make it specific, not general. So everything has to
Mhm.
be to the point.
Right. And be direct. Yeah. Sometimes people again are so nervous or unhappy to give feedback that they sort of sugarcoat it or they do the sandwich. The sandwich is
No, okay,
say
what?
something positive, give the hard feedback and then end with positive. And it sounds good, but I think it only teaches people don't trust me when I tell you something good, because then I'm going to slap you upside the head.
Yeah, can't we just be honest?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, and just be like not emotional about it. That's the thing, is to be factual.
right.
People just actually want the truth,
Too.
and
And
you don't
like
have to be
in
mean.
your situation, maybe if
That's
it's
a little
really
extreme.
hard feedback, well, your other example,
Oh,
when
okay.
you realize you weren't right for that particular
Yeah,
sales job, if something is really not working, maybe it's a sign that this isn't the right job for someone and they'll recognize that.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. There's you got to look back on things in your history of careers, right? Of when things worked, when they didn't, and kind of look back. Was there feedback? Was there not? What happened? So I kind
right,
of encourage people listening now to look at that
right. That's a good tip. Yeah.
and to kind of look
Right.
back. So everyone, supervision matters. It does. Ask Rita, she'll tell you. Supervisionmatters.com is the website to go to. Go get her newsletter. You put that out every month, right? The newsletter.
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah, yeah. But she's traveling too.
Right.
Are
Yep.
you writing a new book yet? Come on, we're all waiting.
I don't know. Maybe I've got some ideas. We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see. Anyway, everyone, supervisionmatters.com. That's where you can get Rita's books as well. Thank you so much, Rita.
All right. Great to talk to you, Lisa.
Thanks for listening to Big Blend Radio's Supervision Matters podcast with Rita Sever. Keep up with Rita at supervisionmatters.com and listen to new episodes every third Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on bigblendradio.com.